All right. Hello, I'm Michael Wolf, and for the Studies in Middle Eastern History movie review, I will be reviewing The Mummy. This is the 1999 version, so unfortunately, no Tom Cruise, but at least we have Brendan Fraser for whatever that may be worth. Um, a little bit of background on the movie before we jump in. Uh, it was, as I said, made in 1999. It is based in 1923, though, in a ancient mythical city known as Hamunaptra, which is not real to our knowledge. But there is one historical aspect in that the mummy himself is actually Imhotep, who was a real guy who lived about 3,000 years ago. But other than that, there's pretty much absolutely no history to this movie. It is a fantasy adventure movie. And the reason I chose this movie is because, well, one, it's a pretty fun movie to watch. But two, and more importantly, uh, I think it's pretty interesting to try and flesh out these concepts that you wouldn't suspect in such a high level entertainment film that isn't necessarily taking on any issue at all. It's quite simply a movie for entertainment and adventure. And so it's kind of interesting to see things such as Orientalism unravel from these movies. Um, so, with that being said, I did want to share my screen for some clips, but something is going on with my hardware playback or something of that nature. So, looks like I will just have to describe the scenes, which should be good enough. Okay, so a good place to begin might be the very first scene of the movie. In the very first scene of the movie, we are drawn to a palace, the palace of the pharaoh, in which Imhotep is in 3,000 years ago. And he is having some sexual relations with the pharaoh's wife or concubine or what have you. But the important thing is that while she is walking, how she is represented in the scene. So she walks in, she's wearing pretty much the least possible clothes you could possibly be wearing, like fishnet over her entire body. And moreover, she has these markings up and down her arms and legs that smudge if they're touched. So it allows people to, particularly the pharaoh, to see if she has been touched or not by anyone besides him. And this is definitely in fitting with an Orientalist perspective of how the Middle East views women, in that they view them as very subjugated to men and very oppressed in Muslim culture. But one should take into consideration that Islam was not invented 3,000 years ago and was not around. So that's notwithstanding. But it's all about the popular representation about a modern standpoint of the Middle East. People just see Middle East. So that's kind of an interesting facet. But anyway, I digress. More interesting is probably what she's wearing. This is a very sexually charged image of a woman. And this is very in keeping with, at least especially, the early Orientalist perspective of the Orient, if that's what we were to call it, the Middle East. And so this was particularly the case in the 14th through 19th, early 20th centuries. Before we see the transformation of the Middle East from the fantasy, exotic dreamland full of exotic things to the terrorist desert filled with bombs and angry men and beards that we see today. And an interesting notion about this movie is it's set in 1999, or it was made in 1999. And so this is right in the middle of that transformation. And it's right before 9/11, which was a catalyst to that being the domain of the Middle East in movies in the West. And it no doubt did expedite that transformation. So here, I would say we see this sexualization in the first scene, sexualization of women, and that's in keeping with the Orientalist perspective, as I said. That particularly, if you look at some Renaissance era art of the Middle East. A lot of it, people who painted the Orient that were not from the Middle East, painted a lot of nude figures, famously a lot of nude women, and this was the very sexualized, promiscuous view of women. But this is pretty much only in the first scene. There's not much more of that kind of imagery throughout. Um, and so, by far, the largest facet of Orientalism found in this movie is indubitably the exoticism. And this is interesting because, as I said, it is after the period where we begin to see this transformation from the dreamland to the terrorist desert, um, as I will call it, I guess, from this point forward, um, in the late 60s, something like that. And so, an interesting facet of that is that we still see the exoticism, and that's something that's never gone away. That was originally the original Orientalist perspective of the Middle East, when Western Europeans would draw monsters in the area because they didn't know what was there. It was exotic. People didn't know what was going on, because they'd never been there. Furthermore, the portrayal of a few of the Arabic characters in the movie is probably the most telling to the portrayal of the Middle East by and large in the movie. So we have a few, most notably, about three that are very notable throughout the movie. And then we have the masses who are Arabic because they're in the region. And the masses are portrayed as, just some incompetent Muslims, basically. Where we see Brendan Fraser take out 30 of them at a time, just because he's the Western hero who's very well trained and excellent. And this is something we see in a lot of other movies at this point, like True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's taking them down left and right, and it's no different in this movie as far as that is concerned. And moreover, an interesting notion is they are lost at one point, lost at what to do, and they stumble across a British naval or Air Force station in the middle of this Egyptian desert. And it's not necessarily a station; it's one old pilot and his rickety old plane. But in effect, the sense we get from this scene is the day is saved once he sees this Western man in this desert. And this is no doubt interesting facet of this movie, in that it's pitting the us against them kind of version of Orientalism. But the main thing we might see in the portrayal of Arabic people in this movie is probably stupidity. They're portrayed as quite stupid by and large. The main character that is showed that is Arabic, that follows the group throughout, he is a warden at a prison in which Brendan Fraser is in the early bits of the movie. And the other main character, woman, goes to try and bail him out of this prison. And he fumbles around making a deal with her, evidently portraying his stupidity, and eventually makes a pass at her saying, oh, you can give me money, but what else can you give me? And he puts his hand on her leg. And so this kind of feeds into that kind of debauched image of the Middle East that goes along with the Orientalist perspective. Also notable is the leader of the opposing American crew, who's also trying to find the treasure. He's an Arabic. He plays the guide to the American team trying to find the treasure. And the view he has towards women, he says, when he sees the other main character woman coming in to do the treasure hunt, he says, I'm not worried about it. What do women know? What does a woman know? And so that's very fitting with how many Westerners see that the Middle East views women in a way that's very unfavorable. And this is evidently not the case. And then there's other small comments here and there, like from the American cavalry there. He says, man, this is a messed up country when something magical happens. And this is sort of a play on words, in that some messed up things are really happening because it's magical and there's a mummy coming back to life. But it's more like, if you look into it deeper, it's some messed up things are happening in this country, and it's they're kind of expected to happen in this country, and essentially that's why this movie is being filmed in this country, because it's an exotic place where these things are expected to happen to some degree, or more likely to happen to any other place in the Westerner's mind, I guess. Um, Other than that, there's quite a bit of magic to fit in with that exoticism, um, dating back to the ancient times in which the movie is originally said to have taken place in the movie fictionally. But other than that, uh, that's about it for the evidence portion of the movie. And so an analysis of that would be that the perspective is definitely a Western one. This is definitely a Western movie. And if I were to redo the movie, I would probably revise the script and make it more interactive with the Middle East, because it's based in the Middle East, yes, but besides a few butts of the joke guys who are Arabs who play throughout the whole movie, who just get a good laugh the whole way, basically. Every other part of the Arabic population are just the mass, and they're portrayed as whatever the mass is typically portrayed as. But I would have it be a little bit more interactive with the surrounding people, maybe the surrounding culture, this and that. And obviously, I would like to have it more interactive with the history of Egypt, because that would be quite a lovely thing. But that's too much to ask for a fantasy adventurous movie, I presume. I might omit from it the fumbling folly that is portrayed as the Arabic characters, and have perhaps a more useful character, a more serious character in their place. Other than that, though, there's not necessarily anything largely problematic in it. In that, I'm sure if you dig or read it as deep as possible, there is. But on the surface, it's a pretty lighthearted movie. And besides the problematic representation of Middle Easterners, it doesn't necessarily paint them in a evil light, which I would say is probably worse than an incompetent light. But I would say painting them in an incompetent light is also dangerous. So that's problematic as far as that goes. But overall, it is a pretty fun movie to watch. I would recommend watching it, and keep an eye out for those Orientalist aspects you may find in it. Thank you.